Good afternoon. Thank you all for coming today to our talk. And I'm Carol McDonald. I'm one of the exhibiting artists here at Frog Hollow, and I'm also the vice president of the board of directors. So I'd like to welcome you here today and take just a minute before John starts to let you know about some of the programs that we do at Frog Hollow other than the gallery. We have lent financial assistance to many of our artisans who have suffered from natural disasters such as Hurricane Irene. We have also started an educational video program of our artists and their process, and really going in depth into their work. We have also done many off-site exhibits, such as the Robert Compton retrospective and the Sabre Field 5 exhibit. And we currently are touring the Peter Miller exhibit, A Lifetime of Vermont People, through the library system in Vermont. It's currently in Middlebury at the Isley Library. So we have, if you've found that you've enjoyed some of these events, we are currently in the process of the 37 for Frog Hollow campaign, in which we're asking 1,350 of our members and friends to contribute $37, which is a very small amount that goes toward supporting the programs that we do. So at this point, thank you again for coming, and I will turn this over to John Churchman.
Well, thank you very much. So thanks very much for coming. My name is John Churchman. I've been taking pictures up in Vermont for a long time, and I remember when I first came to Vermont back in the mid-'80s, and I had come from New York City, and I remember one fall afternoon seeing how the light would come through underneath the dark clouds, and it would suddenly light up a portion of the sky, or would light it up in a way, and I remember being so completely taken by that light, just that quality of light for that really brief little instant. And so for the first couple of years, I tried to capture it. And it's a very transitory type of light that comes in, and you see it after a dark clouds, dark storm. You know, you have a rainbow out in the sky. And I remember asking an old-time Vermonter about the light, and he said, well, he had a really great accent. He was really hard to, I'm not going to actually try his accent, but he was, a fifth-generation Vermonter, and he looked at me and said, well, we call that Jesus light. And I always thought about that, and it struck me as this, this amazing quality to light. And so this is one of my oldest images that I've done that I actually captured. This was done with slide film. And I photographed this in 12 separate exposures. So that's kind of how I do a lot of my work. So this was actually shot with a 50mm lens for your and it was shot here, 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 and here. And what happens is when you're trying to expose for a scenic, this area will go very dark. This area that you're trying to go for, if you expose for this properly, this all gets blown out. And then the sky, the sky is a whole other issue. So what you're really working with in photography is a variety of different f-stops or time exposures. So what I do is I shoot everything off of a tripod. So I set it up, and I'll do the exposure, and I would expose, in this case, I exposed for this area here, then I exposed for this area here, and then I exposed for this area here, and then it went into Photoshop, and then it's all put back together to make a complete picture. Now this was in the very first Photoshop version with a really old Mac that took about 4 hours to do anything. It took forever, it would clink and clunk away, because this file, when I assembled it, was like, I don't know, 300 megabyte file, so which was pretty big back in this was early 90s. So this picture, I guess, is one of the first ones that I really feel kind of captured what I was looking for in light in Vermont, which I've really frequently chased. And one of the things about photographing in Vermont is that you really need to know where you want to go at certain times. You know, you either, to get really great photography in Vermont, you either get up really early in the morning, or you go right at sunset, or other times of the day. I'll take this one down. So this is actually shot, this is the old Underhill ski bowl. And this is where they had one of the very first rope pools in Vermont back in the, I don't know, in the 30s or the 40s. This used to be a ski slope, so it's a nice place off of Stevensville Road. So in terms of that type of light, I brought a variety of pieces, and I guess what I would talk about is, with something like this, it's actually knowing where you want to go and to be there right at sunset or to be right there at sunrise, because there's really just a very small little window when the light's really, really great. Other than that, if it's, you know, if it's a blue sky and it's in the middle of the day, you get a rather flat light, and it's not that interesting to photograph. This is a piece I did this last October. Actually, I think it was October 1. And this is about, what I frequently do is I have a lot of areas that I like to go, that I visit, and I go to them over and over again. Like the mountain, I shoot this every year I go, and it's, you know, there are different quality of light, there are different ways that it appears. And this is just my lower field, and there's, in the morning, there'll be a fog that sits in my valley, and so right about, you know, the sun will rise, and at a certain point it comes up and all this rises. But there's a very magic time when you're taking pictures, when you have the mist in the valley and you have the sun is coming up and it just starts to break through that. So what I would say is, in terms of fall photography, is find certain places that you like to go and explore them as to when the light will be really good. And if you realize, well, that's a beautiful tree, and you think, well, is it really great when the sun is first hitting it and you have the mist that's rising around it? Or is it really great at sunset when it's coming the other way? So kind of look at it that way. Because those are really, in terms of taking foliage pictures, that's the time I would recommend really shooting. So this was from last fall. And then there's another type of what I like for foliage photography. It's finding places, say streams or brooks, ponds, places that have reflections. I like to shoot a lot of leaves, leaf patterns, where you get, you know, you get the interplay of how the branches fall. So you're working on different levels. It's kind of a number of levels, a number of veils. Now this particular piece, this was actually the cover of Vermont Life, last fall's Vermont Life. So that's, you can see how that worked. So this was actually just in the back of my property. There are a series of what I call vernal pools. They fill up in the fall. It gets a very dark kind of quality to the water. And then the leaves, I wait for the leaves, they'll fall. And this particular one was actually shot on sort of a gray overcast day. So when you're working with light, you have the moments when there's really beautiful light that's coming up. And then if you have a gray overcast, it's a great time to actually go and shoot, say, a stream bed, where you're walking along the stream bed and you take a tripod and you work with, say, moving water, which is a really great thing to work with, and the leaves as they fall by. But set your tripod and you set your camera. I use, I'll show you what I use primarily. This is a DSLR, and this is actually a Pentax, but I've shot with Nikon or Canon or Fuji. They're all great cameras. This one actually happens to be pretty much totally weatherproof. Because what I do, a lot of my photography is shot in mist, rain, snow. And this I can stick outside my car window and it gets completely wet. I left this out on my tractor seat the other day in a rainstorm, and I found it the next morning. And it's just sitting. and the lens was a little fogged under it, but so it's nice to get a good camera that you can really be somewhat abusive to, because a lot of the little touch ones, if you left them out at all, or they take a little sand or whatever, whereas this you can take into the ocean almost. You don't want to, this is not quite submersible, but it's a good solid camera, and what I'm shooting with is almost all manual. manual exposure, manual focus, manual, I do everything manually. So what I'll do is on a tripod, I'll set it up, say if I'm shooting like a leaf pattern like this, I might choose like 1/4 of a second, 1/2 a second, you know, so it's a really slow exposure frequently. And then I play with my f-stop. So this has a 30-second to a 2.8. So I might start out at a 30-second and see what I can catch, or a 20-second, and the optimal is say an f/16, which is around in the middle. So when I find like what is the optimal exposure that I'm working for, I'll then shoot a series of shots, generally off the tripod, because anything you're going to shoot that's going to be any good, you don't really want to hand hold it. I mean, hand holding is great if it's a really sunny day and you're walking around, whatever. But if you really want to get something that's really tight, then I would recommend a tripod, and I'd recommend something you can manually focus, because you can pick the spot where you want to be in this. Like if I wanted to focus here, then I focus very tightly here, whereas when you're working with reflections, the camera doesn't know where to focus with an autofocus. So frequently, you're trying to take a shot and it won't focus and won't let you shoot it. So I recommend, one of the things I find that I like to do is I'll bracket like something like this. I might have shot 30 or 40 exposures because it doesn't really matter. And I throw them away, the ones that I don't want. But what you find is that if you set it up and you start to explore it, you can also find out, as you're working with your f-stop, you can find out about depth of field. You know, how much of the depth of field you want, because when you shut it down to like a 20-second or a 30-second, you get an amazingly, you know, sharp, long depth of field. But if you want that place where you want just the, you know, the monarch butterfly that's sitting on the leaf or something, just part of it to be in focus, you want it to be wide open. So, you know, you play around with that, and that's where you start to be able to develop, you know, an image that you might really like. So I think if you look at weather, like during the middle of the day, if I were shooting leaf photography or foliage photography, I'd probably go try to find a deep gorge, like up in Smugglers Notch, where you could go up along the riverbed, or there are a lot of great stream beds in Vermont, and you start walking up them and the leaves are coming down them. It makes for a great walk. Take a little tripod, you shoot the water, the moss, all these effects, and you know, it's a nice way to spend an afternoon. And then you save, like, the other thing I do a lot of is I drive around a lot. And I have certain roads that I go, certain paths that I go, and I'll go back and around and I explore different things. So there are areas that I go to that I really like to, and I visit them every year. And this is one. This one's off of a road called Shaker Hollow Road down below Huntington. And it's just a beautiful dirt road that winds along the top of a big ridge down there. And this one, I like the way the road was going, you know, somebody's driveway going back to their house back here, but this little hill always reminded me of sugar plum land or something. It was just so, you know, colorful and bright. This is also, I shot this at, you know, pretty much at sunset, but it was a very bright blue sky background. And so the part about driving around is discover areas where you can go where there aren't telephone lines that are in your way, or if you're really good at Photoshop, you just take them out. Because also what I'm doing is I'm making art photography. So with art photography, it's a difference from, you know, if I was a journalist, I would leave the telephone lines in. But for art photography, you don't really want to see telephone lines when you're looking at a print on the wall. I don't think there were any in this one, but I'm just saying that a lot of times you might find that the perfect view of the mountain has telephone lines, or there's a house sitting here that you don't really want in the picture. So you can, you know, remove them if you want to. But my point with this piece is that you can frequently find a route, like Route 100 down through Waitsfield over that way is a beautiful way to go. And also following with the way the foliage works, up in the Northeast Kingdom, it's sooner, and out in the lakes, it's much later. And down in the southern Vermont, it's much later too. So the different elevations, so I go to generally I go to different elevations at different times of the year so that I can find out where the peak foliage is. Now this is a piece. I have a farm in Essex, so I have a lot of farm animals, so I spend a lot of time photographing my geese and my ducks and my sheep and various things. This one, I think I thought of this as sort of the peaceable kingdom with all sort of the animals around and the light in a certain way. It's my house. So the other thing I would recommend is finding something that you can shoot when the light just happens, because frequently you'll be there, say you're at your house, and it's like amazing light suddenly happening. And you know, I would generally go jump in my car and try to drive, 15 minutes over to the mountain. I'd get there and it would just be gone, which is what happens. So a couple of things I do. I have places that I can go just right there that I've kind of identified. Not that I frequently shoot my house or that, but I find places where I can go and I can make a nice image. So I feel like I think, well, what I'm trying to say is when you look for really nice light and it shows up and you say you have your camera or you don't have your camera, you get, as a photographer, it's one of those things it's hard for you to really enjoy it. So one of the lessons I frequently worked on is how to enjoy a pretty scene when I don't have a camera. And it's been a real work. I prefer to have a camera, take a picture, because then I find actually the memory of it somehow provides me a lot of enjoyment, that momentary moment of light, because these type of moments of light under these dark clouds are like 10 seconds, 20 seconds, a minute, 2 minutes. I mean, I'm sure you've been driving out on the interstate when suddenly you're just transfixed by this light that comes underneath the dark clouds, and you're like, just that moment. So they're brief. So what I would say, if you're interested in this type of light, it's to find a place on a dark, I don't know if it's cloudy out there today, but on a rainy, cloudy day. And what you're really looking for is when there are some breaks in the clouds and it opens up over Lake Champlain right at sunset. So what I do is I look and find out when does the sun set. If it's 6:05, then I plan on being where I want to be at 5:06. And I sit there. And every so often I just get that moment when it comes through. So that's this picture here, which I'll put up. This was probably my favorite picture from last year. And it goes right back to that first one that I showed you. But this was, I had set up, and I had my tripod, and I had my cameras out there, and I was standing there, and it was dark and gray, and it was raining, and then the rain clears. And then you can see this light way off back behind over Lake Champlain as the clouds just start to part, because what happens is the lake itself produces heat, or there's an action and it opens up this area over the lake that'll clear off on sometimes a cloudy time. So when the sun drops, there's just this moment when it shoots the light back underneath the clouds and it traps it, and it almost feels like it's bouncing, and it'll illuminate a section of the landscape, and this happens. But it was only for about 30 seconds, so I shot a bunch of shots and I captured it, and I've made some prints of it. And so I'd say that's one of the things that I truly look for. There are a few more pieces up here. This is Smugglers Notch. If you go up to Smugglers Notch to go up and over to Stowe, if you look off to the right, especially in the fall when the leaves start to drop, you'll see there's a waterfall over there. You don't see it in the summer because it's all filled in. And it only runs after the rainstorm. So when you get a heavy rain, you get the seasonal rainfall that comes down. And then the other images, there's a leaf image, sort of like what I told you about of walking around along stream beds, and literally just setting it up and just playing with all the color and all the light and all the reflection and all the patterns that you get. And then I just toss stones in and you get the little ripples, so you can play around with your situation too. And then this is just one of those iconic Vermont road shots. And that you find these spots and then just go back to them right when the light's right on them. And this is actually up off of Stevensville Road. I used to live out that way, so I know that Underhill Essex, Jericho, in and around the mountain. That's really the area that I go back to. So I guess that gives you a fairly, I sort of showed what I have here. Were there any questions? Anybody have a question about a piece?
This one here, did you, first of all, about where was that? Was that up in the Champlain Valley or?
This is Casey's Hill.
Okay.
And this is right, Mount Mansfield's right here.
Exactly.
And so if you go through Underhill Center, you go along, this is actually the sliding hill right over here where the kids slide in the wintertime. So if you pull off there, you have this really beautiful view of the mountain. So you get a really gorgeous mountain view when it's not cloudy, but when the clouds kind of come in and they'll sit on the mountain. And then this was peak foliage. I think that was like October 7th last year.
Yeah, I was going to say, I was in Franklin County that day and got sort of similar one. It's not maybe not that good. Did you Photoshop to really pop the light, or is that pretty close to what you actually
That's
saw?
actually really close to what was there. I mean, where I open up areas, like the dark area, and here, technically this goes very dark.
Yeah.
So there is some, basically what I'll do is I'll take it in. I actually shot this in, this is shot in a zonal fashion. This is shot here, this is shot here, and this was shot here. And then you can use, which is very handy in Photoshop. Now, I used to put these all together by hand. I would strip them together, which actually related back to, I started out as an airbrush illustrator in New York City back in the 80s, early 80s, late 70s. And we actually used to airbrush and merge photographs together by hand with, you know, so that's where I got it and came from. But now you can shoot multiple sections and then you can run them through Photoshop and use the automate function and go down to automate and pull it, and it'll usually make a pretty nice image. And sometimes what you have to do is you have to go back and add something because it'll make a choice you might not have wanted. So I probably, the way I would have done this is a multiple exposure put back together, and then I would drop on a mask where I might, say, do a screen mask down here to bring this up, where I was using a different part of the, generally I'll work on this part of the image, this part of the image, and this part of the image. But this is actually very close to what it came out with. And I'll shoot with RAW primarily. I'll shoot RAW. If I have a really nice image, I shoot a series of RAW shots because it gives me a lot of information to work with. A lot of times I use JPEG, and JPEG always comes out a little punchier, a little brighter than the RAW.
Now, is it, I like to keep things simple. Is it kind of counterproductive to sort of, because what I do is like, I'll just do basic stuff, maybe up the saturation a little bit, or you know, cut out the shadow a little bit. I don't do the multiple.
The multiples are really great.
They are great.
Yeah, and that's really, to me, what makes it, because a lot of times I'll take an image and it's flat, and then I'll start to, and the real thing to do when you're pushing color is to keep it within the realms of possibility.
Yeah.
You know, because you have, with what you have now, you have so much ability to slide your, so what I try to do is I try to always maintain it within what is there. But in this particular case, say I brought this out a little bit more. This I neutralized, it went very blue. The color was pretty much there. So what happens too is if you push the color, if you make a multiple in Photoshop, push the color, then you set it in the layer palette to, it says color. That way when the color drops in, it doesn't cause it's sort of a pixelation that takes place into you'll look at them and they don't look good.
Yeah.
So the trick really is to do it on a separate layer, push it in, and then play with the color setting on that layer. Because that way you can drop color in without it disturbing the way it turns out. Because I do a lot of imagery for stock photography, and they kick them all out if they show vignetting or they show, I mean, they won't accept them for stock if they show a lot of vignetting and a lot of manipulation. You know, it has to be seamless, whatever you do. Any other questions?
So when you're shooting, do you use any filters?
No.
Just pretty much right out there off the camera?
Yeah, it's all just, this is it. I'm very simple. I mean, this is a 28 millimeter. This is actually an Adaptol, Tamron Adaptol. This lens is from about 1980. So it's an antique lens. The reason I'm shooting Pentax is Pentax will handle all the old lenses, whereas I shot Nikons for a while, and now they make them, and they do. But when I was doing it, they wouldn't take all my old Nikon lenses. I had like 20 Nikon lenses, and none of them worked on my newer bodies. They just, the image quality wasn't good, but with the Pentax, you can use any of the lenses they ever shot. And so I use a lot of these old lenses because they're really cheap, but they're really great optics. The glass is incredible in them. So that's what really interests me, because really when you're taking a picture, it's, you know, it's how you can capture it, but it's really what comes through the glass. That's, you know, more important than almost anything that when you're shooting. And a lot of the new, like the kit lenses, I mean, this particular lens, you can feel that. I mean, it's a solid thing. Yeah. So it's all very solid, but it's not the newest in technology is what I use. But I find that it works very well because I'm not really, since these are all manual, it's not like I'm really trying to capture you know, sports or something like that. If I'm shooting something that's fast, I put on, you know, I put on autofocus stuff. But for most of the scenic stuff, I do it all manually. All right. Well, thanks for coming then.
Thank you.
Enjoyed.